Musk has gone off in his own way, which we can all agree. I had a very good joke yesterday. Someone said, Elon Musk is not a Nazi, all right? Nazis made really good cars.
Should we start with anagrams? How do they change your life, Stephen?
Well, when I was sent away to prep school, and this is not a moan and a how dare my parents abandoned me, I don't remember particularly feeling abandoned. I felt a bit homesick. I was 7 years old, and it was 200 miles from home, home being Norfolk and the prep school being Gloucestershire. But what really made me miserable was the fact that I was so bad at everything that was valued there, most notably, of course, sport. I was just a very uncoordinated child. I suppose you could almost say dyspraxic in terms of my lack of coordination and speed and agility. And, I couldn't catch a ball. I couldn't hit a ball. I was one of those ones who would sort of close my eyes and thrash my arms with a cricket bat or a tennis racket. I just didn't, I just couldn't do it. And it frightened me and I didn't like it. And I was mocked and hooted at and called words that we cannot possibly use now, but you probably guess what they are. Schoolboys call each other when you're not physically abled. Not only that, but I couldn't sing or dance or paint or draw. I felt very quickly that I was going to be an unpopular or at least ignored child. And then one day in my second or third week, this music teacher came in, ironically the music teacher, because that's, as I say, was one of the things I was not talented at, and wrote up on the board orchestra and then started writing the various sections, brass, woodwind and so on. And I squeaked out, cart horse. And the teacher said, shut up, Fry. And I said, no, but it says cart horse, because I'd seen the letters rearrange themselves in my head, the letters of orchestra, into the words cart horse. A very basic anagram, nothing particularly clever about it, but it just, happened. And I was excited. I'd not sort of noticed that could be done before. And the teacher, to give him credit, Mr. Hemus, his name was, still remember it, even though it was 60 years ago, the teacher was interested enough to sort of not make a fuss of me exactly, but he showed me other words and asked if I could see anagrams in that and asked if I was interested in words and language and things. And it slowly became something I was very kind of proud of, I suppose, and it gave me a confidence in English, a confidence in Latin and French and other languages we started to learn. And I realized that I could sort of use words in ways that other boys didn't, that other boys just didn't have any sense, didn't have what you would call in the theological way a high doctrine of language that I did. They just use it to say shut up and go away and I hate you and all the rest of it. Whereas I had this sense that it was fun and you could use words, you could twist them and shape them and mold them and also tell stories with them, but not just ordinary. Storytelling is from a different part of the brain, I suppose. Not that I considered that matter then, but enriching a story and enhancing it with language, making a scary story much more scary, making a surreal comedy story much funnier, just by the choice of words and by I could see that it gave the other boys pleasure, and it gave me a status of some kind, not that equal to a cricketer or a rugby player, but nonetheless a status. And I was somebody. I was of account, as Willie Loman says, is it in Death of a Salesman? I mattered. I amounted to something, and that matters, as you know, for children. Nowadays we translate that into follows and likes, but that's always been the case at school. The popularity stakes are a big deal, as we all remember, and so that was the first kind of step, if you like.
And also maybe it pointed out that the world kind of makes sense in a funny way. That I always thought that breath rhymes with death. That's just an accident. That's just an accident of etymology, but it always rhymes with death, and therefore there is some sort of tomb rhymes with womb. There is some kind of sense in the world, and the fact that you can play around with letters and reimagine them it's arbitrary, of
Yeah.
course, but there's just an implication. There's just something more if you could only grasp it.
Exactly. And some of them are just so weird that you can't help but be. I told the story of how later in life I still sort of kept on to this. And in the 90s, I got to know through the 80s and then the 90s until he died, the great Steve Jobs. And on one occasion, do you remember those sort of apricot coloured and power books that were like the early iMacs, the sort of slightly translucent plastic? And he was very, pleased as they were coming out. They were the first machines to have AirPort, which was, Apple's Wi-Fi. And I remember everyone saying, "Well, what use is it? What does it do, Wi-Fi?" Because no one had it at home, and it seemed like a sort of strange addition. But anyway, I said to him, because I'd seen this earlier, or maybe on the flight over to America, where whatever reason I was there, and I'd said to him, "Laptop machines are very interesting." And he said, "Duh." I said, "No, not laptop machines themselves, although they are. I mean, the words laptop machines. It's an anagram, a perfect anagram of Apple Macintosh." And he said, "What?" And so I wrote it up on a whiteboard that was there. We were in a room with a whiteboard, and I pulled the letters of Apple Macintosh and laptop machines out to meet each other and showed him. And then he looked for a while, and then in a very Steve Jobs way, and said, "You're weird," which I suppose I was. And then I also I had the great privilege of knowing a little, not well, but enough to lunch with him occasionally. Alec Guinness, the great Sir Alec Guinness, and. I was late for a lunch at the Connaught. He loved the Connaught Grill in Mount Street in London, and he was sitting there looking a little sort of owlishly cross in that George Smiley way that he was so good at. And he'd been doing the crossword, and he said, "And you can finish the crossword." And I said, "Well, okay, I'll try." And I sort of did a few. There were some anagrams there, and he said, "You're very good at the anagrams." And I said, "Well, yeah." "Oh, my God," I said. Hang on, just give me a second. "Yes, your name is a perfect anagram." He said, "I hope this isn't going to be like the anagram you gave Alan Bates." And I used to call Alan Bates Anal Beast, which amused Alan, I'm glad to say. I said, no, this is an amazing anagram. Your name is an anagram of genuine class."
Oh, that's good.
And he stared at me, said, "I shall remember you in my will," which, of course, he didn't, which would have been nice because he got 2% of stock.
Yeah, that would have been a hell of a story.
100 million, something like that's calculated. But anyway, so occasionally it can be a gift. You give people, a rude anagram. I remember for one of my birthdays, I had, lots of friends over, and it was Peter Cook and Eric Idle and John Cleese, all these comedy heroes, and everybody's plasmon was an anagram of their name. Some of them were really quite good.
I can imagine. But, William Shakespeare is "I am a weakish speller."
Yes. And unfortunately, no one remembers Virginia Bottomley anymore, but she's "I'm an evil Tory bigot."
Yeah, I remember.
It's deeply unfair because I don't think she was or is, but it's an amazing thing that you can get such a perfect anagram.
It is. I wonder what the other thing you're talking about here is this. I'm one of those dads that balls on about etymology. So whenever a word what does a word? I have 3 kids. One of them says, "What does X mean?" And I'm fascinated not to say what it means, but where the word comes from. And I wonder whether that's a kind of secret skill that helps you understand the universe. And
it's one of my absolute favourite subjects, etymology and philology generally. And it's, I think, deeply important because there's a wisdom buried and baked into words and language, and what they mean and how they separate their meaning is so important. For example, the way English has this luxury of being able to choose Anglo-Saxon or Latin or Greek and so some. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, let's say healing. Healing is an Anglo-Saxon word, and a healer. We use healer in an almost druidical, mystical way. He's a healer. It's either faintly religious and fraudulent, or it's kind of sort of gentle and so on. But if we wanted to be Greek, which is the language of medicine and science and technology and systems, we would say a therapist, which is the Greek for healing, the therapy. And the Latin word we'd use, we've reserved entirely for religion, a curate, one who cures, a curer of someone. And so these words get separated in their meaning, but it's as well to remember that they can mean and do mean the same thing. And one of the things I said in the lecture was, of course, that I thought I had, with these stories I told and the fact that I was smart and quick at picking up, well, not picking up, but at the classics, and I enjoyed language and words. But then I had this absolutely transcendent epiphanic moment when I was about 12, when I was at home in the holidays, and there was a film on television that had just started when I turned the TV on, so I didn't see what the title was, and it rather puzzled me because it was set in the past. It wasn't Shakespeare, it wasn't a Jane Austen type story. I couldn't quite work out where it was set. The costumes were wonderful, especially the women's clothes, but the men's too. And the language there was utterly extraordinary. And I just sat watching with my mouth dropped open. At one point, this young man kneels in front of a young girl and says, "I hope I shall not offend you if I state quite openly and frankly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection." And I just kind of thought, what is this? What can it be? How can people speak like this to each other? I waited till it was finished and ran to my mother and said, Mummy, I hope I shall not offend you if I state quite openly and frankly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection. And anyway, she explained that this was probably, when I told her the story and what was going on, that this was the film version of The Importance of Being Earnest, a play by Oscar Wilde. And she thought we had the play somewhere in the house, but we couldn't find it. So I went to the mobile library and got it and learned the play off by heart. I was just completely astonished by it. And then later, I kind of tried to work out why some of the phrasing and the rhythms, the cadences, the language, why it was not just so beautiful and so enchanting and so extraordinary and sort of daring in a strange way that people would bother to speak to each other like that, but also why it was so funny. Yeah. And I thought, and your point about philology is a very good one, because it occurred to me that it's deep within us that we only really trust emotional language that is Anglo-Saxon. I love you. You are lovely. I've fallen for you. You're so gorgeous. Whatever. All those sorts of words. But you do not say you're the visible personification of absolute perfection. We have a distrust, because they are Malvolio and they are, the Normans, they are the Guy of Gisborne and the Sheriff of Nottingham, whereas the good Anglo-Saxons with their stout, their ale, as opposed to their wine. Yeah. And it's a long thread, go all the way up through Chesterton and others, this distrust of the Norman, the Machiavellian, the Malvolio.
Orwell says something, doesn't he? I think, doesn't Orwell say that you never use a long Latinate word when an Anglo-Saxon word can
absolutely, he does, yeah. And it's deep within us of that distrust. So, there's that sense that, and it's funny, therefore, because he's declaring absolute passion for someone, but doing it in a way that, and I said in the lecture, because I told this story, and I said, it's as if he's not presenting a wild English rose plucked from a hedgerow, which is what would be romantic, but a hothouse orchid, which is, yes, very stylish, but it's somehow not to be trusted. And yet that returns in on itself, because we also feel that the fact that he's got to such bother, that he has the intelligence and the charm and the wit to use a phrase like that, is a gift. So in fact, it beats the Saxon ordinariness, because it's not a cliche. No. And therefore it is somehow more valuable. So it's kind of both. You're laughing at it because it's preposterously inappropriate, but then you're saying, oh, but so seductive and beguiling to be able to speak like that. What a joy. And that sort of was the gravamen, if I can use a very Latinate word, of my text. The substance, nub or gist, was that we can make language a gift. We all have it. That's the primary gift we have. And instead of just using it in an ordinary way, we can enhance it, enrich it, and therefore enrich and enhance our interrelations with others.
And I suspect, Stephen, you can go further than that and say it's not quite a crime; it's a shame if you use language that's ugly. And we live in the great era of jargon, And you mentioned
Yeah.
this, I can't bear. I mean, you'll have your list. When someone said to me, "Oh, can I just download to you?" I mean,
Oh
did,
God.
did you mean speak? I mean, it's okay
Yeah.
if it's just speak. Just say speak. It's fine. And reach
Yeah.
out and there's a kind of
And then
we live.
using downstream when all they mean is next.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, come on, stop it. I mean, that's one that's arrived in the last year or so.
That's language as a crutch, isn't it? That's language when someone is
Yes.
not sure they've got something to say, so they've got to sort of scaffold it up with something, perhaps.
And the a good response to it is to use a synonym, or in fact, instead of a synonym, a word that means the same, to be Anglo-Saxon rather than Greek. But sometimes it's good to be more compact, and synonym saves time. But yeah, so if they say empowering, you can try and say, well, what does that actually mean? And
Yeah.
what does I'm always very amused by agency and empowering.
Yeah.
They're very much words people throw around these days, and it always used to amuse me that as an actor that I had an agent, because it's a strange and amusing accident of language that each means what they mean because they both come from the same source. I don't know if you did Latin, but there was ago, agere, agi, actum was the verb, ago, agere, to do or drive, to make, to do, essentially to do, ago. And it has agere, A-G-E-R, is the infinitive, agi is the, agere is the preterite or the past, and then actum is the supine, the rather splendid supine. And we get, therefore, from actum and agi and agere, we get agent and agency and agenda, which is the
gerund.
The gerund, and we have action and activate and all lots of words like that. So an agent could have been called an actor, and an actor could have been called an agent. And you could get people who are in plays saying to each other, "Who's your actor?" "Oh, he's absolutely hope."
Yeah.
Ever since I became an agent.
Yeah.
It would be just as make just as much sense.
It would. Do you think, Stephen, that because I did do Latin as it happens, and
then
a bit of
Greek, your knowledge of gerunds and gerundives.
A bit of Greek as well. But I do wonder whether there's some debate these days about Latin, and I honestly believe I couldn't have become able to write or anything like that English if I hadn't studied Latin. I wouldn't have been able to spell if I hadn't studied Latin. I wouldn't have understood grammar because English grammar was never really taught to me, but Latin grammar was taught to me as part of. And I just wonder whether, we live in a world where everything's all about that very sort of teleological view that education is just about getting a job at the end of it. It's very utilitarian, grad grinding, and actually,
even the assumption that training someone for a specific job is the best way of making them good at that job.
Yes,
it might be that, and it often is, which is what's so unfair in the world, is that those with a so-called elite education, what used to be called a classical education, tend to be more able to fit into anything because they have, sort of power over their own mind, and they know the limits of their knowledge, which is an incredible. My friend Christopher Hitchens, that's how he defined education: is so that you learn the limits of your knowledge. It's an educated mind knows the limits of their knowledge. It's the sort of opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect, if you like, that you actually know what you don't know, which is an immensely important thing and enables you. It's an enabling, which is the Anglo-Saxon for empowering, of course, and it enables you to pick up things. So, you used to see it at the BBC. This awful thing of these Oxbridge types, but they would sometimes have to step in and do editing, and they could learn it so fast because they just were able to bring threads of ideas together and synthesize them and bring them into a something. Sometimes, yes, of course, educated people have no common sense and all the rest of it. But to train, you train a tree against a wall, you staple the branches against the gable end of a wall, say a pear tree or whatever, and it's all straight and it exactly fits the wall very, very well, but it's no good for anything else. Whereas a tree that grows free and it is able to go.
So maybe everyone should learn Latin, Steve. I mean, maybe it's not possible, but maybe everyone should learn Latin wherever you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always I do feel, and I'm sure lots of people do, when you hear someone who, like me, has and you has the benefit of a classical education, then when they're in power in government, talking about how education needs, how training needs to be, and that we need to get rid of all these elite. And elite people saying we need to get rid of elitism is a bit rich in a strange way. Although, I mean, it's a very difficult thing to get right, because I understand why people look at it. Always used to be the German model of technical colleges and so on, and how successful they are teaching engineering and so on, and things get hived off so very quickly. A student learns about this element of science and this element of business and economics, and they're ready for the world. They're ready for their specialist training, and it's very hard to argue against it. And there are lots and lots of children who are very put off by grammar and spelling and the sort of talk that you and I are engaged in now is off-putting, and one has to recognise that it is bad. It's very, as far as they're concerned, it's very upsetting almost, really, and therefore one is anxious that everybody gets a chance to get inspired, to for their mind to be freed, and for their curiosity to be fired. And it isn't always the same path. Not everybody.
Oh, look, that's very
read the
wise.
12 Caesars and go, yeah.
I totally understand. But I also wonder if
Yeah.
it's very hard to ever love language if you never taught how to love language. And one way
Yes, I think that's right. But I think the language side is free and is for everybody. They don't therefore have to go into Latin and Greek. But I mean, this sounds like a typical old person. Do you even know what you're saying, Stephen? But, if you listen to Kendrick Lamar or whatever, there is poetry in hip hop, or the best of it. And there is a freedom of language. There is a very exciting energy and thrill in the way some of them use language. I mean, some of them just use it in the most homophobic, and misogynistic way imaginable, which is a bit kind of and full of cliche and not very interesting. But that's true of all people who use language. And but there are really good examples of the way of language being front and center of a huge musical movement.
I think I have to let you go at some point, Stephen, because I could talk to you about this for hours. But it's easy.
Yes,
I'm sorry. It's so easy to say everything's degrading now, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that. That one of the things we do on our program all the time, we talk about various problems in the world, and social media is the cause of them, or making everything worse. It's ruining our attention span, ruining our ability to use language. And I did remember that back in the day, you were sort of the godfather of social media.
Absolutely. I'm the first to confess how wrong I was.
Do you think you were wrong? Because I think of you as this...
Yes. I didn't see coming. I mean, it's been well expressed by some, but, it's very hard to retain optimism in the face of recent history, a certain optimism about the human spirit and the human desire to be good, to make the world better. I don't mean in a progressive way necessarily politically. I just mean, if you want, in a Christian way, in any way in which you believe you're put on this planet not just to satisfy your own self or to aggrandize your personality and to be admired, but that was what most of us wanted to be. We fell asleep thinking, oh God, was I a bad person last night? And I'll try and be better tomorrow, sort of thing. But I mean, essentially, you can almost date it. 2012, maybe. In 2007 and 8, Twitter began in 2007. I think Facebook was already beginning to be huge. They then got bigger and bigger and bigger. And there were things like the Arab Spring, and yes, I was very excited and optimistic, juiced up about the whole thing. Not Facebook. I always absolutely hated Facebook. Never trusted or liked it at all. But Twitter, I just thought wow, it's wonderful. It's like a beautiful swimming hole, beautiful river where you can all swim, and it's taking us to marvelous places, and it's bridging different sides like a river can, and it's just gorgeous and fertilizing the world. And what happened, not with Twitter straight away, but what happened with Facebook, and what was obviously that they built up an enormous user base, and yet it was free. So they had to have advertising. And advertising was going to monetize the entire system. And so they needed clicks and eyeballs. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they sat down cynically and indeed evilly to do this. They just, in fact, the sort of task they gave their algorithm in order to get these clicks, these eyeballs, was maximize engagement. Just two words: maximize engagement. In other words, send to the user content that will engage them. Engage, it's a simple, nice word. And nobody, I don't think anybody predicted, no psychiatrist wrote, or psychologist rather, wrote an article, no sociologist wrote an article that I ever saw at the beginning of this saying, this is dangerous. To maximize engagement means to maximize hatred, resentment, envy, anger, dislike, fear, all the things, the Pandora's box of bad spirits flew out, and the engagement was maximized, totally maximized. And the more it was maximized, the more and more and more, and on came this sudden thing that what the French call ressentiment, that whole mixture of fear and resentment and hatred, and a desire to put down people you perceive to be your enemies, and a kind of hate weeks everywhere in the Orwellian sense. That this was fantastic for advertising. It absolutely made billions and billions, untold billions. And the more they made, the more they wanted to make it. And even though they were told, even though supposedly progressive and decent figures who can sleep at night like Nick Clegg were told, they still carried on. They still said, it's not our fault. They still said, we're not a media publisher. We're a platform. So none of the laws that you in your radio and your colleagues on the Times newspaper have to obey, none of the codes of practice and protocols and ethics that are second nature to journalists, none of those apply in something in which people now get 80 to 85% of all their news, but it doesn't count. And nobody has called them out because they're all afraid. They're terribly afraid of the enormous power and Zuckerberg is beginning to flex it more than he ever has. Musk has gone off in his own way, which we can all agree. I had a very good joke yesterday. Someone said, Elon Musk is not a Nazi, all right? Nazis made really good cars.
Don't put that on Twitter. He'll find you. He'll find you, Stephen.
Oh my God, he will. No, I left Twitter the day he bought it.
Did you?
Absolutely, yeah. I left then, and it saddened me. I had 13 million viewers because I had been an early user, and I had, my name had been connected with it in the early days, and the beautiful swimming hole where we'd all made friends with each other and it was all fun. We suddenly saw turds floating on the surface and cut at the soles of our feet on, old rusting shopping carts on the bottom and broken glass. And it is like our rivers. It is like a river. I mean, a river is a very good way of looking at it. It's a river that communicates. It's a river that travels. And like our rivers in Britain, it is contaminated. It's polluted. They've polluted the cultural water that our children drink. You have children, you mentioned, and you must worry about the air they breathe, the cultural air they breathe, that it is polluted, it's contaminated, and it's you can't stop them breathing it because it's everywhere. It's what the culture now is, and nobody has the courage to do anything about it, including me to some extent. I mean, I suppose I could, if I could be like, Clarkson, not Jeremy, the slave, the abolitionist, the one who started the whole thing in the 18th century. He traveled 1,000 miles a week by horse and cart back and forth between Cambridge and London and the north and so on, persuading people, telling them about slavery and what it really was. He and people attacked him. He was a genuinely extraordinary man who changed the world. And I try and think, well, should I now devote the rest of my life to fighting? I'd be like St. Paul in a way. He started off as Saul of Tarsus persecuting Christians, ended up a Christian. I'd be a reverse version. I started up as an absolute lover of this new religion, and now I want to destroy it. Well, destroy is a bit strong, but I want it to be controlled. And of course, the argument is the moment I say that, I'm apparently an enemy of free speech. But it's like,
I don't think anyone listens.
Is a gardener an enemy of free growth because they do a bit of weeding? That's all I'm saying. We need to weed. We need to make the growth strong and healthy so that everybody can enjoy the garden, because it's otherwise a mess.
Well,
anyway, gosh, I don't know how we got on to
I'm sorry, Stephen. It's a lovely metaphor to finish on. It's a sad subject. It's a lovely metaphor. Listen, I'll have to let you go because otherwise It's
been lovely talking to you, and thanks for.
It's been wonderful speaking to you. It's a great lecture. I'm going to play it on
my fellow professor.
Yes, well, exactly. That shames me really.
No, don't. I'm sure you were brilliant at it.